Well, that was an interesting start and an interesting finish to last night's Easter Sunday night special in Richmond. Hey there, race fans. It's Race Day Top 5 with me, Frank 5. Richmond Raceway, a track that is short. It is obviously a long green flag run racetrack. And last night we provided some entertaining moments from the start of the race to the end of the race, where one of the Virginia natives didn't show up until when it mattered the most, albeit in a little controversial fashion. Let's get into all that went down in the Commonwealth of Virginia last night. Number 1, Hamlin steals the victory late. Denny Hamlin captured his second win of the season, winning last night's Toyota Owners 400 at Richmond International Raceway, beating out Joey Logano, Kyle Larson, Martin Truex Jr., and Chase Elliott for the victory. Of course, a Chesterfield, Virginia native, this is considered Denny Hamlin's home track. This is his 5th win at this facility. To start off last night, Denny Hamlin was never really up at the front of the pack early on in the race because they qualified in the middle of the pack, and like a lot of drivers, they were trying to feel out a little bit of grip on the racetrack and try to find the lane where their car ran the best. He was trying to find his way to the front. He got into the top 10 by the start of stage number 2, and by the time we got into the final stage, he showed up in the top 5, and everybody's like, here he comes. Here comes the Virginia boy who always knows how to get it done when it matters the most. Well, he was not as dominant, though, as his teammate Martin Truex Jr. was last night. Denny Hamlin's strong run in the final stage is incredible. I mean, he started out in the top 5. Then when we had some green flag pit stops, a couple drivers pitted early. But Hamlin was one of the few drivers that elected to extend the stint by just a couple of laps. And then he would pit later and make up for lost time during the next green flag run after everybody made their pit stop. Then when we got into the final round of green flag pit stops, Hamlin again stayed out late. Then he came in and he started whipping his way through the field. He came back from at least 9 seconds to get within 1.6 seconds of the leader. It looked like Hamlin was going to settle for 3rd place last night. But with 2 laps to go, a caution came out when Kyle Larson spun off at turn 4 in the front stretch after getting loose and making contact, getting hit from behind by Bubba Wallace, generating a caution. And that brought everyone to pit road because fresh tires meant a lot for this last run. And Hamlin's team got the job done with a 9-second pit stop that took them from 3rd to 1st off of pit road. You can't deny, as much as you sometimes do not like him, he's the most polarizing driver in NASCAR, Denny Hamlin's pit crew gets the job done when it matters the most. There's a reason why they've been one of the fastest pit crews on pit road, especially when it comes to late race moments and needing to win the race. Hamlin was able to get the restart and beat Martin Truex Jr. to the line and hold him off for the final 2 laps and win the race, thus securing his 2nd win of the season, and now the 2nd driver this year to have multiple wins behind William Byron. However, there was talk, especially from Martin Truex, about what Hamlin did on the final restart. If you look at it closely, Hamlin apparently seemed to get a little bit of acceleration before entering the Geico restart zone. The rule is you cannot get a jump on the guy on the outside until you cross that first line, and then you can determine when to go. Hamlin got a little bit ahead of Truex before they got to the line, yet NASCAR didn't review the restart. They said, probably assumed that they did not want to challenge this late in the race and throw a little bit of controversy into it. Well, listen, it's a controversial moment right now. There is a fair argument to say that Denny Hamlin jumped the restart and should have been black flagged and shouldn't have won this race. But NASCAR didn't review it. Steve Phelps said they took a look at it and they didn't see anything wrong with it. From my perspective, it looked like he jumped the start by just a little bit. Yes, it's just mere inches, and we didn't have the SMT data to analyze and see if he had a little bit extra acceleration at that time to get a little bit of a go-ahead ahead of Truex before they got to the restart zone and start overtime. We can't look back on it now. Obviously, it happened, but there's a lot of people upset about the end of this race, particularly with what happened with Denny Hamlin getting a little bit of an acceleration. But it is what it is, and Denny Hamlin has secured his 2nd win of the season. And again, these short tracks so far this year have been beneficial to guys like Denny Hamlin and the Toyota camp in general. We've been wondering how the new Toyota would fare out on the short tracks. So far, it seems to be their bread and butter thus far, as well as road courses. They've shown speed at all those venues. It's the 1.5 miles and the 2 mile tracks that I'm interested to see what they could do. Obviously, super speedways, you can run up front. You can do whatever you want up there. But 1.5 miles, they've been pretty good in the 1.5 mile track we've been on so far. But we still have a few more tracks to go to coming up, like Texas Motor Speedway. And we still, of course, have got Michigan to run later this year, the lone 2-mile track we have on the schedule. So far, the Toyotas have got the short track package figured out, and they definitely have the speed. At the end of the night last night, Denny Hamlin's team pulled through when it mattered the most. So congrats to Hamlin and the 11 team on winning last night in Richmond. Number 2, Truex falls short. What a dominant car Martin Truex Jr. had last night. He was my pick to win this race because of how good he has been here in the past. And he's also very, very fast on the short tracks this year. Of course, he had a good car at Phoenix. He stayed out late on the long green run, then he had to pit late and rebound to get inside the top 10. And at Bristol, finished runner-up to Denny Hamlin, even though for a brief moment it looked like he was going to take the victory from the 11 car, but unfortunately Hamlin got him at the very end of that race. And then Circuit of the Americas last week, a road course, Truex got squeezed in between a few drivers early on, and he rebounded to finish in the 10th spot. But last night, he had the best car. The early part of the race, he was playing second fiddle to Kyle Larson, and then by the start of stage number 2, Truex was able to eke closer to Kyle Larson's lead, and when he pitted early, he assumed the lead, and then Larson pitted a couple laps later, but got caught by a controversial caution, which I'm going to talk about later. But Martin Truex Jr. was able to take the lead from Larson at that point, and from there on, he was the guy. He was so strong. He got his first stage win of the season, winning stage 2 last night, and the final stage, despite getting to some heavy lap traffic at the end, it looked like the race was his, despite challenges from Joey Logano and Denny Hamlin from behind. But again, with that caution for Kyle Larson, they came down pit road. Truex put on 4 tires. It was a pretty, simple 10.3 second stop for him, but unfortunately they were 1.3 seconds slower than Denny Hamlin's team, who got the job done better on pit road. And of course, that restart, Truex argued that Hamlin kind of beat him in the line, and he was not really happy with the way Denny Hamlin raced him at the very end, kind of rubbing him up the racetrack a little bit. And I don't know what happened in the final lap with Truex. He just doored into the side of Kyle Larson going down the back straightaway, and I think he was just frustrated because I had to win, and the caution came out. I don't think he was really upset with the 5 car in general, even though the 5 caused the caution. Certain things happened at that point. I don't think Truex should be really upset with the 5 car. He's just upset about how the race ended for him and how his teammate raced him. And on the cooldown lap, he let his frustration out with his teammate, giving him a couple taps before he went to pit road for post-race interviews. So I understand Martin Truex Jr.'s frustration. I mean, you rarely see a guy like him get upset. Sometimes you hear it on the radio, but to see that action at the end of the race, I mean, you can't blame Martin Truex Jr. for being frustrated because he had the win slip right through his hands. But it was still a strong night for the 19 team regardless of the outcome, with the leading the most laps, having the best car in the long runs, winning a stage. They've been so good at the start of the season. A win's going to happen. It should have happened last night. But, there's nothing you could do about the circumstances that happened at the end of that race last night. So a nice run by Martin Truex Jr. in the 19 team, but just fell short. Number 3, Logano with a much-needed top 5. Joey Logano got his first top 5 of the season last night. I know, it's hard to believe. A 2-time Cup Series champion entering last night had no top 5s because of how rough the start of the season has been for them. They had one of the best cars in the Daytona 500. They had probably the best car, but got caught up in that wreck late in the race with 10 laps to go. Then you go to Atlanta. They had one of the best cars. They won a stage early on. They seemed to have the race victory until late in stage 2. They got up high in turn 2 and got clipped from behind by Chris Buescher, sending Logano on the outside wall and pretty much knocking him out of contention. Then we go to Las Vegas, a track where he's been good at the past. Didn't run great, but still ran well and got a 9th place finish out of it. I'm like, okay, that's good momentum for Logano. Then we go to Phoenix, and he just was non-existent all race long. That car was not fast, didn't handle well, and just struggled all race. And, of course, got wrecked late by John Hunter Nemechek and led him to be very frustrated about the whole thing. Then Bristol, he had a decent car at the beginning, but then faded late when everybody's tires started falling off. I mean, Logano was not the only one to have that stuff happen. But late in the race, his car just wasn't the same as it was at the start of the race. Then last week at Circuit of the Americas, it was a quiet, calm day, but 11th place finish was still a decent result for him. Last night, they put together their best race of the season, and this is a track that Joey Logano has come out and said, I enjoy a lot because tire fall-off and management here is something that I'm really good at, particularly at this racetrack. And last night he showcased it. He ran top 5, top 7 all night long, had a good race car. At times late in the race, he was closing in on Martin Truex Jr. and looked like he could take the victory from him until that late race yellow. They weren't as fast as the 11 and the 19 car off pit road, but they were able to get second place from Truex through 1 and 2 on the final lap. and thus securing a second place finish, a much needed result for the 22 team. They're still on the outside of the playoffs as of right now, but they gained a lot of points with the stage points and the finish last night. They're now 19th in the standings, just 14 back. They're going to win a race, but that result last night is just the shot in the arm that they needed to get some momentum going for. So a great job by Joey Logano and the 22 crew last night. Number 4, solid results for Kyle Larson, who dominated early, Chase Elliott with his first top 5 of the season, and a nice recovery for Christopher Bell. Let's kick it off with Kyle Larson, who started on the pole for last night's race. At the beginning couple laps, he was really good, took the lead from his teammate Chase Elliott after lap 5, and seemed to be the guy to be out front in the clean air, and stayed there for pretty much the rest of that stage and got the stage win. Stage 2, at the beginning, he was really good, held off a couple challenges from Truex. Then we had the green flag pit stop sequence where he extended it a little bit further, and then he came in for pit stops. And then after that, I'm like, he's going to do this on one stop, drive up there, and take the stage win from Martin Truex. But that all changed when a controversial caution came out for Kyle Busch, going up and hitting the outside wall through 1 and 2, and after that, a quick reaction from NASCAR. They threw the yellow flag. A lot of people said that should not have been a caution because Kyle didn't hit it that hard and put debris down, but I don't think NASCAR wanted to take any chances, specifically when it was a little bit damp up there earlier in the day from raining. But Larson, after that, pretty much kind of cost him a chance to win the race because as we got longer through the race, his car wasn't the same as it was at the beginning because I think we got a little more heat into the track with the slick tires that we were running versus the damp weather tires at the beginning of the race. Larson still was in the top 5, but then on 2 laps to go, he got a little loose off of 4 on the front stretch and then got tapped from behind by Bubba Wallace, setting the 5 car spinning. But thankfully, he was far enough ahead of the next place car on the track on the lead lap that he was able to stay in the top 10. And they got a good pit stop, got out of the pits in the top 5, and they ended up with a 3rd place finish despite the contact with Truex there on the last lap. Larson said, I don't know what that was all about, but he said he has so much respect for Martin Truex Jr. A lot of people really have respect for Truex as being pretty much the main veteran of our garage, aside from Denny Hamlin and Kyle Busch and Brad Keselowski. But Larson has said he has a lot of respect for Martin Truex Jr., and he said, I don't know what that was, but I don't hope there's no hard feelings between the two of us. And I don't think there is, really. And Bubba came up afterwards to Kyle Larson, said, I'm sorry that wasn't intentional. And Larson said, no, you're good, man. I mean, this is not a repeat or carryover from their run-in at the Las Vegas race in the fall of 2022, where Larson got loose on the bottom, hit Bubba in the wall, and Bubba retaliated for no reason at all and turned him around and just did a stupid thing that day, and of course got himself a 1-race ban the next week. But this was a very cordial explanation post-race about what happened. Bubba said, I'm sorry, man, I didn't mean to. It was not intentional. Larson said, no, I know. My car was getting loose at the very end regardless. And Bubba said, well, you got a good finish out of it. I got karma because he had a slow stop on that last green flag, on that last pit stop at the very end of the race. So Larson, despite being strong at the beginning and spinning late, is still able to get out of there with a nice top 5 finish. Then we have his teammate Chase Elliott with his first top 5 of the season and his first top 5 finish since last August in the night race at Daytona. I know, that's hard to believe. It's been a long time since we've seen Chase Elliott up at the front in the top 5 and possibly contending for a race win. But last night they put together a really good effort. They started on the outside pole, which I'm kind of surprised because we all know Richmond sometimes has been hit or miss for the 9 team. But last night, I think they put together a good race. Started on the front row, took the lead from Larson and led the first 5 laps, and then I think the grip in his tires went away a little bit quickly, running up front and abusing them. He fell back inside the top 5, remained in the top 10 at the end of stage 1. Then we get to stage 2, stayed within there, but then that caution came down and kind of kicked him to the top 15. But then in the final stage, it started to pick off a few guys one by one as we got further and further into that long green run. And the pit stops, the 9 team did a really good job on their stops, advancing ahead of a few other guys during those 2 green flag pit stops during the final stage last night. And they got a great pit stop on the final. They did a great job on their final pit stop, setting up for overtime, where they got out of the pit 6 and got a nice restart on the outside and passed their teammate William Byron for 5th place and locked up their first top 5 finish of the season. I mean, so far the season for the 9 team has been okay. It hasn't been great, but it certainly hasn't been terrible. They've been finishing the races, but haven't been consistently running up towards the front, despite the stage win at the Daytona 500. And they had the top 10 at Bristol a few weeks ago. Last week was an opportunity where they could have finished top 5, but of course the drive-through penalty for cutting the corners in the S's, which I completely disagree with because his car is a little loose there and out of control. What is he supposed to do? But last night, they got themselves a good result and hopefully a lot of momentum heading into next weekend. And then we have Christopher Bell, who started deep in the pack last night in 29th spot. But he, along with a couple other drivers like Brad Keselowski and Josh Berry, came from the middle of the pack and came all the way up inside the top 10 by the time we got to stage number 2. Well, a couple other guys got to the top 10 before Bell did, but by the time stage 2 started, the 20 car found himself in the top 10, and then we got into the final stage, he found himself in the top 5, and Bell's been pretty good at this racetrack since he's been driving here for Joe Gibbs Racing. He got himself in the top 5 and looked like he was going to be possibly contending with his 2 teammates, the 22 and the 5 for the race win in the very late going. But on the first green flag pit stop of the final stage, Christopher Bell shot himself in the foot with a speeding penalty. Thankfully, he was able to extend the stint a little bit longer. Then he came in and started that pit stop, and of course, after that penalty, he was still able to stay on the lead lap and pass a few other guys, and got himself inside the top 10 by the time that late race caution came out, and still ended out with the night with a 6th place finish. It's a good result, but you also think about what could have been. What if he didn't get caught for speeding? I think Bell could have been contending for the race win at the very end of the race with his 2 teammates, but coulda, woulda, shoulda, but a solid run nonetheless for Christopher Bell. Nice nights for both Larson, Elliott, and Bell last night. And number 5, interesting racing from the start to the finish. The start of the race, it was raining earlier in the day, and we're thinking, oh boy, are we going to have to delay the start a little bit? But NASCAR had the backup plan in hand, and it was the wet weather tires. Now, over the last couple years, a lot of people and NASCAR have been debating about, should we consider maybe running wet weather tires on some of the shorter tracks where there's not a lot of acceleration, especially considering like when we have Mother Nature show up. And the big part, of course, is we also need to make sure the track's not completely wet, or else these guys would be wrecking and spinning around. Well, we did a little bit of a test in a ways last year at the North Wilkesboro All-Star Race, where in the heat races, a couple drivers ran the first couple laps in their heat races on wet weather tires because the track was relatively damp from earlier showers. We were able to run those races that night, and nobody had any problems with it whatsoever. And everybody said that the wet weather tires actually had a little more grip to a track that's especially damp. Well, we started the race on the wet weather tires in damp conditions last night, and I gotta tell you, it was so entertaining watching these guys running from the bottom to the middle to the high groove, finding any sort of grip that they could find out there until the track started to get a little bit of heat into it after a couple laps we ran on it and taking away the dampness. That was some entertaining racing last night at the start. I really enjoyed it. I think we kind of checked the box saying we can run in the damp conditions on these shorter tracks like Martinsville, Bristol, North Wilkesboro, and of course Richmond now, but it's not going to be completely wet, obviously. It needs to be just a little bit damp. If it's fully wet, I think a lot of guys would be spinning and wrecking out, and we don't want that. But once we got the track completely dry, NASCAR threw a competition caution at lap 30. Everyone came down pit road for non-competitive stops, put on the slick tires, and everyone resumed the race in the position where they were the moment that competition yellows came out. We resumed the race, and of course, for the rest of the night, it was again mostly long green flag runs with the slick tires that were on. And of course, this track has turned into a long green flag 1 race, which has been a custom in the past. And we see guys taking differing strategies, of course, pitting early versus extending the stint and hoping to get a little bit extra track position if you extend it longer, and then you have a good clean stop on pit road, of course. But last night, again, it was a typical Richmond race, and then we had the caution late in the race and the controversial finish at the very end. And that leads to a lot of questions. Should Richmond get only 1 race on the schedule? I mean, that's a discussion that NASCAR keeps having talks year after year to year about changing the schedule up a little bit. I mean, of course, we've now added Iowa to the Speedway. Maybe that deserves a second race date and replaces Richmond for one of its dates. But that's not for me to decide. That's for NASCAR to decide. At the beginning of the race last night, the damp condition racing was very entertaining. And then the rest of the race, of course, was the long green runs. And you see the strategies of guys pitting early versus some guys extending the stint. And tire management. And sometimes it's really tough to pass here until guys have tire fall off and the guys behind them save their tires enough to catch up to the guys that are beginning to fall off. That happened a lot last night as well. So discussion going forward. I mean, I want to know what you guys think. Do you think Richmond deserves to still have 2 dates on the schedule, or should we downsize it to 1? I don't know what the answer is. It's up to NASCAR, but fairly interesting racing from the start up until the finish of last night. Now we're off for some more short track racing next weekend in Martinsville, another track where guys like Denny Hamlin, Martin Truex, Kyle Larson, Chase Elliott, and Christopher Bell have been successful at in the past. And of course, last year I got to witness going to that track for the first time ever in my lifetime. It was an amazing experience, getting to see these guys beating and banging on the short track paperclip that it is, and then getting to see Ryan Blaney win that race and go on to win his first ever Cup championship the week after at Phoenix. This weekend's race should be fairly interesting, and if for some reason it does rain, we saw what we did in Richmond, we can run in damn conditions on this small track. So I'm interested to see how it goes, especially with this track being the first with the update short track package, and hopefully we have a good amount of tire fall off that can lead to some guys going and passing people when, you manage your tires versus your tires begin to fall off on long runs. So what will happen next weekend? Will we have a lot of beating and banging? Will we be running in the damn conditions? Will Denny Hamlin go back-to-back to start the season, the first driver to win back-to-back races? Or can Martin Truex Jr. make up for the one that got away last night and take it from Hamlin or anybody else next weekend? We shall see. It'll be very interesting at the paperclip. So I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. I hope you all had a lovely, lovely, lovely Easter Sunday yesterday, spending time with your family and celebrating the resurrection of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, who died on the cross on Good Friday to save us from our sins. So I hope you all had a wonderful Easter, and I hope you all have a wonderful week coming up this week. Subscribe, like, and congrats once again to Denny Hamlin and the 11 team on their win at Richmond last night. Have a great week, everybody. Let's go racing!